France is getting yet another environment minister. François de Rugy is being replaced by Transport Minister Elisabeth Borne. He resigned on Tuesday amid a spending scandal. Chris Moore is standing by at the Environment Ministry. The Turkish representative for Reporters Without Borders, Erol Ünderoğlu, has been acquitted. He was accused of terrorist propaganda for collaborating with a Kurdish daily. And Sudan's ruling military council and opposition leaders sign a power-sharing deal after months of protest. We'll have more from France 24's Julia Steers in Nairobi. Hello and welcome back to the newsroom. I'm Claire Pride. We start here in France with the 11th resignation to hit Emmanuel Macron's government. The Environment Minister, François de Rugy, quit on Tuesday after the investigative website Mediapart accused him of extravagant spending. He denies any wrongdoing and has filed a legal complaint against Mediapart. Macron quickly picked Transport Minister Elisabeth Borne to take over his duties. Chris Moore is at the Environment Ministry for us. He joins me now. Chris, François de Rugy just had to go.
In the end, perhaps, yes, not just one story in Mediapart, a website which has proved problematic for a number of French politicians, but a week of allegations, really, including perhaps these most damaging ones that Monsieur de Rugy and his journalist wife entertained visitors who didn't have much to do with his official function, with giant lobsters, champagne, expensive wines, etc. More allegations that he benefited from social housing to which he was not entitled. Now, ministers living extravagantly off the public purse is not unheard of here in France, but the context is a little bit different this time round. Emmanuel Macron's government still facing those yellow vest, gilets jaunes protesters out on the street, people who accuse the government of being out of touch, elitist. They say they want fiscal justice. Those protests have ebbed recently, but obviously the government doesn't want to stoke them again. And then, of course, there's the fact that Macron himself came to power a couple of years ago in the wake of a number of scandals during the election campaign, claiming that he was going to be the man who would clean up French politics. Mr. de Rugy is saying all of this is a little bit unfair, but in the end, as you say, he did perhaps have little choice but to go.
Chris, this ministry, the Environment Ministry, has been troubled for a while.
That's right, yes. One former occupant nicknamed it the Ministry of the Impossible. It's had 14 incumbents in 20 years. Mr. de Rugy's predecessor, Nicolas Hulot, he's a popular TV personality and environmental campaigner here in France. Well, he walked out of the job on live radio, claiming that the government wasn't taking the environment seriously enough. Now, France's environment watchdog has just released a report saying that the country is not anything like living up to its own targets. The president, Emmanuel Macron, has said he wants to refocus attention on the environment in the second half of his five-year term. That's the context in which the new minister, Elisabeth Borne, takes office, somebody who's been hailed by her promoters, including the president, as a gifted technocrat, but her detractors are already speaking out, saying that in her role as transport minister, which she continues to occupy, in her recent rail reform, she was guilty of putting the car over the train. Remains to be seen how long, of course, she will manage to stick it out in this role.
All right, thank you very much indeed, Chris. Chris Moore reporting there from the French Environment Ministry. Now, French lawmakers are debating the merits of CETA this Wednesday. That's the trade deal between the EU and Canada, which the European Parliament approved in 2017. Critics say CETA, will empower big business and be bad for the environment. All 28 EU members must ratify the deal for it to take effect.
A win-win for Europe and Canada, or an environmental and health menace? Negotiated over 7 years and approved by the EU Parliament in 2017, the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, has been in effect on a provisional basis for nearly 2 years. Proponents say it's already having a positive impact.
I hope the French Parliament will adopt CETA, because we've seen that the sky hasn't fallen. It's been good for France. It created jobs and possibilities.
CETA eliminates roughly 98% of tariffs on all commercial goods between the EU and Canada. It provides protections for region-specific goods, like French Roquefort cheese. It also allows European and Canadian companies to compete for government contracts in both regions. Opponents, including farmers and environmentalists, say CETA comes with unacceptable ecological and health risks.
This trade deal will have unprecedented and dangerous consequences for the planet, for our agricultural model, and for our public services.
They worry it could allow imports of meat from animals raised on hormones and animal bone meal that are banned in Europe, and that it could boost imports of oil from Canadian tar sands, some of the world's most environmentally damaging. Opponents also alarmed by an arbitration system that could allow multinational companies to effectively sue governments over policies that damage their commercial interests. More than 70 unions and environmental groups have signed a letter asking French deputies to reject the deal. But given the large legislative majority of President Macron's Republic on the Move party, CETA is expected to pass.
In other news, a court in Istanbul has acquitted the Turkey representative for Reporters Without Borders, Erol Umdaoğlu, and 2 other campaigners on charges of terrorist propaganda for collaborating with a Kurdish daily. This case triggered international alarm over press freedom in Turkey. And we can now cross to Istanbul. We're joined outside court by Johan Beer from Reporters Without Borders. Hello, thank you very much indeed for your time. First of all, your reaction to this acquittal.
Hi, thanks for having me here. Well, of course, we are deeply relieved by Erol Umdaoğlu's and his colleagues' acquittal. We are deeply relieved, but this is the end of a nightmare that lasted 3 years. Erol Umdaoğlu and his colleagues were spent 10 days in preventive detention at the start of this trial, and new charges were just brought against Erol Umdaoğlu in a different case, and he will start facing these charges in court starting on the 7th of November. So this is clearly not the end, and our feeling of relief is tainted with bitterness.
Now, could you remind us or tell us more about the circumstances of the arrest and why it is that they were put on trial in the first place?
Sure. Erol Umdaoğlu and his colleagues took part in a solidarity campaign with the Kurdish newspaper Özgür Gündem, which was forcibly shut down in 2016. So they assumed the role of symbolic editors-in-chief, 1 day each, to stress that the fate of Özgür Gündem was a question of pluralism, not only the question of this particular newspaper. So this was merely a symbolic function. But nonetheless, the prosecutor's office and the judges pursued charges based on the content published on the day when Erol Umdaoğlu and his colleagues were symbolic editors of 1 day. So Erol Umdaoğlu and his colleagues were charged with terrorist propaganda, inciting a crime and praising a criminal, with a potential prison sentence of more than 14 years in jail. So these were really serious charges, which we deem were purely aimed to intimidate journalists and fellow civil society activists in Turkey. This trial lasted for 3 years, so these charges were very serious. Yeah.
Sorry, it's just that we're running out of time. I just wanted to ask you, you mentioned that this isn't it for Erol. He's facing new charges. But on the whole, the fact that Istanbul is now no longer governed by the ruling party, does that give you hope that Turkey or Istanbul is going to be more liberal, more tolerant, treat journalists better?
Well, it's hard to see a connection with the way journalists will be treated. Of course, it is a sign that things are beginning to crack in the way Turkey is ruled, but the powers of a mayor are quite limited, and there are plans to limit them even further. So it's a bit early to say, but there is not a change to expect in the coming months in the way journalists are treated in Turkey. The country still ranks 157 out of 180 countries in our latest press freedom index, and is still the biggest jail for journalists in the world. So there is still so much to be done before, so much to be done.
Okay, Johan Beer, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to talk to us here on France 24. Johan Beer from Reporters Without Borders. Now in Sudan, the ruling military council and opposition leaders have signed a power-sharing deal. It's been more than 3 months since the army toppled longtime leader Omar al-Bashir, and opposition leaders have been calling for civilian rule ever since. In June, the army turned on protesters and more than 100 people were killed. Talks were called off, but then mediators got involved. The signing of a deal today appears to confirm an agreement made in principle earlier this month, as France 24's Julia Steers told us from Nairobi.
They had agreed, the two sides, the Transitional Military Council and protest leaders, to a power-sharing arrangement that centers around this idea of a sovereign council that will lead the government, lead the country until elections can be held in 3 years. Now, the basic premise of that is that the military will lead for the first 21 months, and then the civilians will take over in this transitional government until elections can be held. The document that they signed today was after several weeks of continued mediation, international pressure, and mediation by this Ethiopian-led team. It was heralded as a victory by both sides, and it certainly now provides a document to hold both sides to account for what's to come. That said, of course, many regional analysts and diplomats agree at this point that there's still a lot to be determined in terms of the actual structure of the government, the actual structure of the power sharing deal, and we expect there to be a constitutional agreement which will iron out a few of these items signed later this week.
Is it time to declare the year-old Ebola epidemic in the Democratic Republic of Congo a public health emergency of international concern? That's the question the World Health Organization is putting to experts today. If the answer is yes, then that could mean more funds to fight the spread of Ebola. The meeting comes after the first person to be tested positive in the major city of Goma died. Erin Okungeye reports.
Health workers scramble to prevent what's for now the second deadliest ever Ebola outbreak from becoming the deadliest. Local health authorities have already started vaccinating the city's residents with an experimental vaccination that proved effective in the last major Ebola outbreak.
Yesterday, we officially started vaccinating people who were in contact with the patient. There are quite a few high-risk contacts and relatives. We have vaccinated 150 people so far.
The first victim to succumb to the virus in Goma was an evangelical pastor who had been on a trip to Butembo, one of the outbreak's hardest hit towns. The location of the most recent case is adding to the concern of international health officials. The Democratic Republic of Congo shares a border with 9 countries, and Goma alone is in close proximity to 3, Rwanda, Uganda, and Burundi. A month ago, 3 cases were already confirmed in Uganda, though no new cases have been registered since. On Wednesday, the UN's World Health Organization will meet for the 4th time to decide whether or not the Ebola outbreak should be declared a public health emergency of international concern and to coordinate the regional response.
We are also ensuring, as the WHO, working together with the authorities in Rwanda as well as in DRC, and we have actually to commend the information exchange flow between the 2 countries that has been in place since the beginning, including also information exchange with Uganda.
Though declaring an international emergency could bring more assistance to the region, others worry it could backfire by leading to travel restrictions that could damage the economy.
That's it for now. I'll be back in about 15 minutes. Stay tuned to France 24.